Good morning and welcome to the Apprenticeship Diversity and Social Mobility Forum. It's my honour and pleasure to bring back the forum again following the Winter Forum in November. And as today is the day when all the shops are opening and we begin to ease out of lockdown, it's really a true testament to see as many of you guys joining us today and showing your commitment to the topic today. And I know the sun is slowly making its way out, so fingers crossed you can all make a trip out today to the shops and having haircuts, etc. Before I begin, could all attendees kindly turn their cameras and microphones off at all times to avoid any interferences with the forum and its recordings. This forum is brought to you by the Bameaa Apprenticeship, an employer and training provider tech platform that brings together a community of organisations that promotes apprenticeship diversity. Through our platform, it's our ambition to build a place where companies can not only recruit diverse talent, but also build a culture where diverse apprentices can thrive. Don't forget, you can share your insights using the social media hashtags, which is ADSMF, and tag us at BAMEAA UK. Also try and find the speakers and tag them where you can as well. Again, a quick reminder, please keep your cameras and microphones off at all times, just to avoid any interferences with the session today. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please use the chat function on the right-hand side, and we'll try and get through as many of these questions when we can. Excitingly, the forum has grown in its support. We've seen so much so that we've got some really fantastic names backing us this time. So the first big part is Mindful Education, who specialise in creating media-rich professional courses and apprenticeships, setting a new standard in the delivery of digital education. They partner with colleges across the UK, producing award-winning courses in accounting, finance, management, law, HR, which are delivered through an online and on-campus blended learning approach. The second is the City and Guilds Foundation, which is part of the City and Guilds Group, which has a specific focus on high-impact social investment, recognition and advocacy programs. Each of the programs they run as a catalyst for them to make a difference to people, organisations and society, no matter who they are or where they come from, to get the opportunities to succeed. And last but by no means least, the Social Mobility Commission, who are an advisory non-departmental public body sponsored by the Cabinet Office. Now, just thinking back to our last forum, one of the key topics which we discussed with the Minister Gillian Keegan and a few of our panellists was on digital poverty. What transpired was the true scale of digital poverty, and you probably saw what the government were doing, were rapidly ramping up their support in terms of laptops. And what this made us aware was that there's a massive need to invest in addressing the needs of young people in education rapidly. So the pandemic has really exposed the socioeconomic holes within society, and those that we have seen and those we are yet to see. And as recovery begins, the talk of investment and specifically money needs to become more real. That's why the theme for this forum is about investing in diversity and social mobility. With tomorrow's session about investing in communities and where it's worked, so that's where money has been invested and where it's worked. Today, we're discussing why diversity and social mobility needs serious investment. So I'd like to welcome my panelists for today. Joining us, we have Chris Goulden. So Chris is a Director of Impact and Evidence at Youth Futures Foundation, a new What Works Centre, which focuses on youth employment. Previously, he was Deputy Director at Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and he's also worked within the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit and the Cabinet Office. Next, we have Sapreena Kumari, who's an award-winning Director for Admissions, Student Recruitment and Outreach at Aston University. Sapreena has been in the education sector for 14 years in further education colleges and most recently in higher education. All her roles have focused on social mobility and supporting students from disadvantaged backgrounds to enter or re-enter education. And lastly, we've got Louise Timperley, who is the Apprenticeship Manager at the Co-op. and she's previously led on the delivery of apprenticeships in the world of business and finance, and has worked in the apprenticeship world for about 25 years, leading a government initiative at an intermediary level, supporting apprenticeships, connections between employers and education. So welcome to my panelists.
Morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
So I think it's a good point to start with Chris here. So Chris, you're part of an organisation called Youth Futures Foundation, and the Youth Futures Foundation invests quite heavily into services for underserved communities. And what I like is that you identify what works, invest in potential, with a focus on change. Chris, could you kindly share some insight into the work of the Youth Future Foundation and how it actually works?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Isa. And yeah, great to be here this morning. So as you say, yeah, we're a new What Works Centre. We're focused on finding the best ways of helping young people from marginalised backgrounds into good jobs, especially those from ethnic minority groups. And we know that there's still a really big employment gap between ethnic groups, as well as for disabled young people and other people who face barriers getting into work. So our approach is based on creating and curating the evidence base so that we can scale up that learning and help practitioners, employers, policymakers do the best they can for young people. So since our launch last year, we've invested in the largest range of programs of youth employment interventions for evaluation that we've ever seen in this country. We're investing in over 30 organisations who are supporting young people to find jobs and putting in place robust evaluations to see whether these interventions help to get better long-term outcomes for young people. So that includes things like mentoring, one-to-one support and advice, skills training, mental health support, work experience, infrastructure support, and much more. Many of the components that you'll also find within an apprenticeship scheme, of course. While this evidence takes time to assemble, we've already used research from elsewhere around the world and from the UK to influence the design of policy in response to the pandemic for young people. So as well as Kickstart, which we think needs both extending and expanding, we're keen to see a guarantee, not just an offer, of learning or earning for all young people in England. So apprenticeships have to be a key part of that guarantee. So as I say, I'm very pleased to be here to be part of this discussion and hear the questions and hear what the other speakers have to say.
And an important follow-up to your question, Chris, is what have the outcomes been in terms of the work that you've done so far, particularly from a social mobility perspective and a diversity perspective?
Yeah, so diversity is very much at the heart of what we're doing as an organisation, and our roots, as well as being in the What Works kind of movement and our funding from the Dormant Assets Fund through DCMS is also in the race disparity audit. So that the focus on race and ethnicity and closing those employment gaps for ethnic minority young people is kind of at the heart of our mission. We are a very young organisation. We've only been going for about a year, but as I say, we've already used the evidence with our partners in the Youth Employment Group. And if people on the call haven't come across the Youth Employment Group, I'd very much encourage you to go over to LinkedIn and join up. There's a monthly meeting of everybody that is interested in youth getting better outcomes for young people. So through that group, we've been very much involved in the design of the response, the policy response through DWP in particular to the pandemic and the design of Kickstart. So our position, we are independent of government, but our money obviously comes through government. So we're trying to tread that careful line between being a critical friend so that we are able to influence and that we're a trusted partner of government, but at the same time not afraid where the evidence says that they're doing something wrong or they could be doing something better. You know, that is part of our mission to make that case too. So yeah, we've done well so far, I think, given how long we've been going, but very much have an ambition to have much more impact in the future.
No, I think that's quite an important piece of work that you've done. And I think this is a nice segue into moving on to Louise here. So, Louise, you're part of a large company and well known across the UK, and you'll be paying the apprenticeship levy, which a lot of organisations like yourselves are. What we know from recent press and that a lot of companies have been scrutinised for how they've been using the levy, particularly focusing on existing staff members over new apprentices, including 16 to 18-year-olds, where among the biggest gaps are. So within the co-op, you've taken a unique approach to using the levy to boost diversity and social mobility. How did this come about, and what does this entail?
Yes, thanks, Lisa, and lovely to be able to talk to everybody today. As you mentioned, Co-op is quite a large organisation. We've got 60,000 plus colleagues within our business, which means we've got quite a hefty pay bill, and alongside that goes an apprenticeship levy bill as well, which I have to say from its inception in 2017 we were very happy to contribute to, because it's good to be able to see influencing the actual apprenticeship agenda with money going into a pot, so to speak, as well. So our bill every year is just over £5 million. And obviously we want to use that to support our apprenticeships in our own business, and we do a lot of work there, ensuring that we can actually attract and retain apprentices across a wide variety of sector apprenticeship standards, and also from different backgrounds. So we've got something like 1,200 apprentices in our own business. That means that we get a chance to spend about 2 million a year of our own levy, which leaves 3 million unspent, and goes back to HMRC for them to spend on apprenticeships elsewhere. So we've been very keen to influence government on this and try and ensure that we get best outcomes from our own levy, but also from the levy that's unspent by other businesses. So when we took a look at our data and wider data on evidence of apprenticeship success and outcomes, we did notice that there was quite a lot of disparity between achievement and outcomes for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and actually from other underrepresented groups as well. So we decided that we would try and do something about it by using our unspent levy to support businesses to encourage young people and older people into apprenticeships from the different sectors. So what we launched in March is our Co-op Levy Share initiative. And what we're actually doing is looking to other businesses to come and join us, to collaborate, to try and build a pledge fund of about £15 million. That's our initial target, just to see whether we can then link up with other organisations to encourage recruitment of apprentices and upskill of apprentices from particular areas, including individuals from BAME backgrounds, also some areas of low socioeconomic deprivation where we know apprenticeship uptake is low as well. So it came about from discussing and researching data, but also thinking about how we can influence one of our missions this year, which is cooperating for a fairer world, and trying to remove some of the inequality and inequity within the apprenticeship space as well. So that's where we are. We're about a fifth of the way to our pledge pot, and we're actually going to start making matches to support apprenticeship training in May.
And there's been press about this where your CEO actually has openly and publicly spoken about his support for this, and we spoke about in the very first forum in the summer last year about the very first topic was leadership. Particularly for yourself and at the Co-op, how important was leadership in this decision making of how to use this levy and using it for those from minority backgrounds?
Yeah, it's been critical, to be honest. Our chief exec is in the limelight quite a lot, Steve Morels, and this agenda is very close to his heart. He's really keen to, as I say, to remove inequality where we can. And he took a stand last year for us as an organisation to actually support anti-racism after all the terrible things that happened last year. And he feels that this is a way of us actually taking some positive action and trying to make some difference in society. And for us as a co-op, it's better for our own business, but it's also better for the communities and our members across the UK as well.
No, I think that's quite an important point, especially where it's coming from a well-known brand, well-known organization. And I think that moves us quite nicely onto sort of bringing in Sapreena, who's from Aston University. And Sapreena, Aston University has been, for as long as I can remember, talking about social mobility for quite a long time. But and it's becoming to the forefront as a leading apprenticeship provider for degree apprenticeships. And we've spoken countlessly on how degree apprenticeships can be seen as a good a vehicle for addressing social mobility. But before that stage, Aston University actually physically invests in social mobility and diverse talent before they even get to university. So how does it actually work for the university?
Thanks, Isa. Thanks for inviting me. So you are right. Aston does invest incredibly heavily into social mobility, and that's because for us, a large majority of our students meet multiple markers of disadvantage. So we don't just have students coming from one specific marker of disadvantage. We're often dealing with students who meet multiple. So the barriers to learn, the barriers to progress, and the barriers to graduate are much more because there's so much intersectionality at play. We invest in a wide number of ways, and one of the biggest things that we're most proud of, and the things that I do at the university in terms of pre-access, is supporting young people through their educational journey before they get to university. So this will be through specific community outreach programs where we talk to parents about higher education, about degree apprenticeships, about making the right choices at GCSE. We work really closely with almost 80% of our local and regional schools and colleges to provide access support, and this could be through really intense and sustained progressive programs over 2 years with the same students, or it could be one-off interventions. But for Aston, it's not just about getting students into the university from disadvantaged backgrounds, it's about supporting them through their journey. So our investment doesn't just stop when they come to us. We have a really large number of scholarships aimed at students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And if you're a care leaver, obviously the support and interventions you will need might be, quite different to somebody from a low household income, for example. So we do tend to target our interventions and support based on the level of disadvantage that a student is coming with. We obviously do some Aston's really famous for its placement year and has been for a number of years, and that's because we've done some really heavy research into the social mobility that a placement year can provide to students who come into the university with a really low level of social capital, and then allowing them to gain work experience to allow them to have graduate outcomes. So we invest in a number of ways, and the main reason is that it really supports our graduate outcomes, it supports our key beneficiary strategy, but not only that, we have responsibility as a civic university to ensure that the graduates that we turn out at the university stay in the region to support and sustain our economy, and all of our interventions generally work towards that.
And there's we live in a world where terminology is important, and I'm kind of guilty of this myself, where I've used the term disadvantaged, but really what it is that you're sort of increasing access for talent pool, because technically the disadvantage is more for the organizations not tapping into this diverse talent pool. And I mean, from a university perspective, what have you learned from that process of reverse engineering how you onboard students, or how you reach out to new students? What's that university learning process from that?
I think that it's a lesson twofold, and number one is that unless you work with students with large levels of disadvantage or specific markers of disadvantage, you don't know what their journey is, and we sometimes, I think, as a society, we kind of write off these students, or we just say because of the barriers that they've had to education so far, they might not have the same outcomes as who are more disadvantaged. So less disadvantaged, more advantaged. So I think the number one lesson is that everybody can actually start the same starting point if we provide support. You know, being inclusive and diverse isn't about giving everybody the same tools. It's about giving people the appropriate tools to be able to get the outcomes that they need. So I think that the first lesson is that everybody it can achieve the same outcomes. In our sense, it's graduate outcomes if they're given the right tools to succeed. And secondly, I think for us as a university, it's that we are a civic university. We are incredibly passionate about the region and ensuring that we're contributing graduates to our local economy, and to discount a really large proportion of our region based on their disadvantage, I think is just a wild notion. So for us, it's shown us that we can do this. We can support our civic responsibilities, and we can be a really big player in the region with supporting our local economy. And these are students who deserve that opportunity to do so.
Fantastic words, Ben. I think coming back to a point that Louise made, Louise, good question on just following on from Sapreena's point. Is there a role that, from a social mobility perspective, that investments can play when it comes to different age groups or different age groups and different backgrounds? And we're talking from an employer's perspective here.
Well, we were going to look at some of the reasons why you would want to invest in apprenticeships from a diversity and social mobility perspective. And for me, there's some really compelling research that PwC have done looking at youth employability, where they've compared the UK's performance on young people who are not in education, employment or training with the kind of best in Europe. And these estimates are always slightly dubious, but there's a lot of assumptions involved. But they reckon that the UK could add 40 billion to its GDP if it reached the same kind of levels of young people in work or training or learning as achieved in Germany or some of the countries where that is done really well. So there's a real dividend there for employers and for the country.
Yeah, I think if you remember a report that came out a couple of years back when it came to representation from minority backgrounds, and that was 24 billion on its own respect. So if you compile the two together, you have a massive economic output from a community perspective. I mean, just going back to Louise again, because I missed out on that part there. Did you want to add your part onto it again, Louise? Sorry, my apologies for that.
No, just checking. Can you hear me now?
Perfect now.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think the question was about investment in colleagues at different ages from an apprenticeship perspective. And yeah, what we've been doing at the co-op is just having simple conversations really with our colleagues who have found some difficulties. And one of the areas that we've been investing in is looking at English language training for some of our colleagues for whom English is not their first language. And what some of our leaders were telling us was that it's not being able to speak English. Sometimes it's about the written word and some of the nuances of the English language that are very complex. So we've invested in some training in that regard for some of our colleagues who are seeking promotion opportunities and really want to use improvement in order to do that. And that is proving to be a very successful way of encouraging our talent through the business. We're also using some training for colleagues who want to enter degree apprenticeships and have found that some of the academic challenge, and Sapreena, you'll probably relate to this in your world as well. Our colleagues wanted to have that confidence to be able to take on a more academic apprenticeship programme, and in order to do that, we've supported them in advance of applications to just ensure that they do feel as if they have the confidence to get started and to achieve on the programmes. And this investment just came about just from having one-to-one conversations between managers and colleagues, just to find out what their needs were. So, and one of the points I wanted to make today is it's not always about massive investment. Sometimes it's just about talking to people and finding out how we could support as an employer to improve their chances.
Yeah, and I think it sort of brings me on to my next point. So we've kind of heard on the different types of investments, etc. But sort of looking back on all your experiences, and I'll start with Sapreena on this. Sapreena, just looking back on all the answers we've had today, it brings me to the topic really of what this whole session is about, which is about actual, real, hard investment. So why does diversity and social mobility need serious investment, and where can businesses start?
I think so. If I take the first answer, which is why does it need serious investment, is because diversity and social mobility and inclusion, it's not just about making sure that our workforce represents the region. It's actually about diversity of thought in senior leadership positions, diversity of thought at board representation level. It's incredibly vital for businesses to be able to meet the needs of their stakeholders. If their stakeholders are super diverse and their businesses are not, there's going to be a real disconnect there. In terms of what can people do to start, I would say the first thing is that making sure that you understand what your stakeholders need, whether that's internal within the organisation or external, the types of people that you're trying to reach. Each set are going to have different requirements, and social mobility and diversity is not a one box ticks all exercise. So you have to be prepared if you're going to do something of this nature to be able to actually drill down and target. The other thing is reach out to other organisations within your sector who you feel are doing a good job or are halfway there or are just a little bit further in their social mobility, diversity and inclusion journey than you are, because there's so much best practice to be able to be gleaned, and people are not in competition for each other with regards to how they're servicing social mobility and how they're investing in it, and more than likely people are going to be willing to have a conversation with you. The last thing is about being flexible and agile to change. There's no wrong way to do this if you're doing it authentically and from heart. So that you might try something and it might not work or it might miss the mark. That's okay. It's better than doing nothing. So being agile and flexible to change, but brave enough to take the first step is definitely, I think, the way forward for organisations to start their journey. And investment doesn't just mean putting loads and loads of money into a specific social mobility programme. It might be about training your workforce to be able to, for example, do unbiased recruitment, for example. So investment means lots of different things to lots of different companies, and it's about working out where organisations want to target their efforts.
Louise, that same question to yourself.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Sapreena has said there. It's important to identify why you're doing what you're doing, and we know it's great for society, it's great for our communities, and it's also great for our businesses if we make that investment. And from a co-op perspective, we try and start with our co-op academy schools. So we sponsor, I think it's about 25 schools at the moment, and a lot of our colleagues are governors at those schools. And we are using that to try and influence the curriculum that's taught in those schools to ensure that individuals from certain areas of low socio-economic advantage are able to access opportunities for employment. And the co-op, with its knowledge of business, supports the young people in those communities, which are deliberately selected from a sponsorship perspective to be in areas of more deprivation. So we know we can make a bigger difference. But as far as investment is concerned, it's all about raising awareness and educating our own colleagues first and foremost, and making sure that they understand why and how and what they're doing and what needs to change. And that education and awareness raising will drive that change within our business and obviously outside of our business as well. So we've put a lot of training opportunities together. We have all our recruiters have gone through that training that you referred to, Sapreena, so to remove unconscious bias from recruitment. But we've also got a whole suite of resources which everybody is encouraged to access just to really understand more and more about the agenda and why it's important, as I say, for the individuals, for the communities, but also for business as well.
And lastly for Chris there, but Chris, I want to add one thing to your question part as well. Also for government as well, where should government start, but also with businesses, and why is the need to invest in social mobility and diversity seriously needed?
Yes, so well, I was mentioning some of the kind of productivity benefits of getting more young people into employment and learning, possibly up to 40 billion extra. I think we are seeing a sea change in a lot of employers' kind of attitudes and practice. I mean, a lot have been doing great work for years and decades, but there does seem to be a moment where this is becoming kind of the norm to think about how you're employing young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, ethnic minority groups, disabled people, looking at gender pay gaps. You know, there's a lot that employers now are doing off their own back without the need for regulation or guidance from governments, and I think that is the way forward. But you know, governments are a massive employer themselves, so we need to think about public, private, and third sectors in all this, and about the economy as a whole. So you know, that the diversity there is just huge. And when you look at the evidence about the effectiveness of apprenticeships, it's really strong overall, but we don't know much about the different kind of outcomes for young people doing apprenticeships in different sectors, in different parts of the country, and what kinds of impacts they might be having on the local economy. So that's an agenda that we and other What Works centres are really hoping to get into a bit more.
And the reason why I added government onto that was because government actually put a very minuscule amount of money into finding out why diversity inclusion, so why from a Bameaa representation, Black, Asian, minority ethnic representation within apprenticeships, and how to improve it. And it didn't go too well. I mean, there was it didn't really move far. So I think government are trying to work out themselves where they can start as well, and importantly for them. I mean, kind of coming on from your point, Chris, and essentially moving on to my final question, really, which is: there's organisations, there's training providers, there's employers, there's government departments here who are, as you rightly said, fantastic employers, tuning into them and have got apprenticeship programs, but also that some of them do and don't know where to start. From an investment perspective, so as I mentioned, obviously the government had the 5 Cities project, but the government themselves are trying to work out where next to go with that. But for those that are tuning in now, if there was one piece of advice that you'd give them from where they should start, where should they start? Who should they involve? Particularly, we're talking money, diversity, social mobility, and the whole piece around apprenticeships. So I'll probably start with Chris with that.
Yeah. Well, I guess my advice on where to start is the proven benefits of apprenticeships. So one of our fellow What Works centres, the What Works Centre for Local Growth, did do a review of evidence on apprenticeships a few years ago, looking at evaluations to the kind of highest quality standards, so that we could be really sure that what they were finding was kind of, you know, really playing out in practice. And they found that apprenticeships do improve skill levels and stimulate those who do them to undertake more training or study. For many, they improve wages, but this isn't always consistent, so there's a lot of diversity in apprenticeships too. They increase the chance of getting a job afterwards and reduce the risk of unemployment. So there's a whole swathe of positive outcomes from apprenticeships that's proven in the evidence. At level 3 or higher, they give substantially higher lifetime wage gains compared with lower level apprenticeships. We also know what works to encourage people to undertake apprenticeship in the first place. So that's things around pre-qualifications, the prospect and actuality of higher wages, as well as subsidies to take part. But thinking about the employer side, what do they gain from apprenticeships? So there's some tentative evidence that firms who offer apprenticeships experience economic benefits like higher productivity, higher profits. They also get access, of course, to so higher skilled workers. But as I say, there's still plenty that we don't know. So do apprenticeships work better in some sectors than others? And it'd be great to get some thoughts from people present on the call about that. Do they have benefits aggregated at a local level? Are nationally run schemes better or worse than locally run schemes? We've seen a lot of those differences in practice, but not much evidence about which might be better. And do the benefits of apprenticeships hold for much larger programs? So if government does make more investment, does make those programs bigger and larger, do those benefits really hold? Most importantly, we need to make sure the benefits of apprenticeships are felt by those who need it most. Young people see much bigger wage gains than older workers, but I'm sure everyone on the call will know that we've been seeing kind of falling numbers of younger people who are doing apprenticeships. So now it's in the latest stats, the number of starts is only just over 50% for those under 24. But we are seeing growth in the numbers of starts for people from minority groups, so going up from 11% to 14% in the latest data, and rises in the numbers of female apprenticeships, but kind of no change at all really in the number of disabled people who are doing apprenticeships. So it's quite a mixed picture when you're looking at diversity in apprenticeships, and I think there's clear evidence there of where the government and others need to focus.
Yeah, and I think that question that some of the questions you asked kind of should really go towards to Louise. I mean, Louise, any thoughts on Chris's points and the questions that I asked around where, if there's one particular place where employers or organisations should start?
Yeah, from an apprenticeship perspective, I think it's really important that the culture and the leadership of the organisation is completely in line with those views. So we would encourage any businesses, large or small, really, to have somebody really senior sort of advocating for apprenticeships and for diversity in apprenticeships, and if that can be a sponsor from the executive team, then all the better. And what we find is that cascades down through all the layers of management, and it actually starts to be embedded throughout the whole organisation. And I think Chris's comments are interesting about young people in apprenticeships, and we know as a business that having young people straight out of school or straight out of college into work, whether it's in one of our stores, in one of our funeral homes, or in our support centre, a lot more support is required from managers. Everybody on the call probably realises that it is an investment, so way beyond what the apprenticeship levy can support in terms of paying for the training and assessment costs. We ourselves have to invest in some cases, the backfill costs when our colleagues from stores are out of the store and are doing their 20% off the job training, so away from their workstation. So there is that big investment, but we do a lot of research on how we get productivity gains from that, and we get the opportunity for colleagues to improve their own performance, and therefore improve the store's performance and the whole business. So we do know that investment is worthwhile. However, in some cases, it can be challenging when you've got an individual line manager that will just see an apprentice is not working for them for 20% of the week. In some cases, dependent on the apprenticeship standard, of course. But that's where we have to do some more raising awareness and educating of our managers so they can understand why that support and is actually worthwhile for them in the long run. And I think it's also important to point out investment in older colleagues. We have a number of requests from some of our existing colleagues who have perhaps been in role maybe 10 years working in one of our stores and have decided that perhaps their children have started school, or they've got more time to focus on their own development. And that's when the apprenticeship programmes really do come into their own, particularly where we're able to support with functional skills, maths and English for colleagues who have not had the success in those areas in the past, or just not had the opportunity to work in those areas. So we're really keen to encourage that, and to, of course, focus on the youth agenda, but not lose sight of some of our older colleagues who really do benefit from this.
Well, that's a very interesting point you make there. I've got Sapreena. If I can pass that question to Sapreena, and then we can probably go over to questions and answers then.
Yeah, so I think just to echo really what Chris and Louise have said in terms of where should colleagues start if they want to introduce the apprenticeship agenda, it's really about what levers that they should pull. So first of all, as Chris said, they need to be really crystal clear about the value that it will bring to the organisation, what are the actual benefits, what's it going to provide, and really just make a compelling case to this is a multi-departmental, it's got to be multi-departmental for any organisation to be involved in this. So just having a really clear business case about the benefits and working with key stakeholders internally, and then taking that into a more senior position to be able to convince people that it's the right thing to do.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sapreena. I think it's probably a good point to kind of move on to questions and answers. For those of you who want to ask a question, if you want to ask with use your microphone, just let me know, and I'll it's a raise your hand function here, and I'll go through that way. Alternatively, please use the chat function, and we can go through that way. I've got a very provocative question that employers may or may not like this question. I don't know. Should employers, and this probably goes back to I would say Louise. Louise, should employers have a ring fence or be mandated to ring fence some cash or sort of part of their levy or to causes around social mobility and diversity?
That's a very good question. I was talking earlier about the fact that the apprenticeship levy has sort of forced businesses to invest in apprenticeships because they've got no choice about how that amount is taxed from their business. And I think there was some controversy in 2017 and earlier about whether this would be a good thing for businesses or whether businesses would push back against it. What we have noticed is that some businesses will pay the levy, but then not use it for apprenticeships because for various reasons they don't feel compelled to do anything with it. Government still gets that cash, and it's still being used on apprenticeships elsewhere. So I think it's a real difficult one to try and force people to ring fence cash for this. I think it goes back to what each of us have said on this call. There has to be seen to be a business benefit. Or a community benefit for businesses to want to engage. And we as an organisation, for example, have set our own internal targets. We've got targets about our leadership population and trying to increase the percentage from ethnic minority backgrounds. That's something that we want to do for us as a business. We know government has talked before about percentage of women in boardrooms, and should that be mandated that businesses are forced to work towards that. I think the view is that there has to be a reason for it, and it's better for the businesses to work through that themselves rather than to have it mandated upon them.
That's a very fair point that you make, and I think a lot of businesses will appreciate that. So we've got a couple of coming. So we've got a question here for you, Louise. We've got here is where your colleagues in stores are taking apprenticeships. Do you notice or support those with digital poverty, as mentioned earlier, by supplying computers, etc.?
Sorry, could you just repeat that last part, please, Isa?
Yeah. So do you notice or support those with digital poverty, as mentioned earlier, by supplying computers, etc.?
Yes, we do, and particularly in recent months with the pandemic, where most of the learning has had to go online and be virtual. We've ensured that every colleague who is on an apprenticeship programme has had access to laptops, not tablets. It's been laptops primarily, and we found that this was something that we had a lot of support from training providers on as well. Actually, it's been a really joint effort to ensure that everybody could access that learning from a suitable device without having to struggle.
No, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for our speakers that you'd like to ask? Does anybody want to come onto the microphone and ask any questions?
There's a question in the chat about endpoint assessments, I think.
Let me see if we find that. So are you finding issues with EPAs and whether some groups are disadvantaged in these compared to others. So that's probably more for the delivery side. So should we start with Sapreena on this? So Sapreena, are you finding any issues with endpoint assessments and whether some groups are disadvantaged in these compared to others?
So the types of apprenticeships that Aston does tend to be higher apprenticeships. I could tell you that we don't see much difference in this in comparison to more disadvantaged and least disadvantaged, but there are nuances, especially and in particular this year since COVID. I think that has really where we've had yeah, it was just a quick point to say that obviously the pandemic has really made advantage or disadvantage gaps absolutely huge, given issues such as digital poverty, the area where people are studying and their capacity to work from home. So there's been some significant differences in terms of endpoint assessments.
And did you want to add to it, Louise?
Yeah, I don't think we've noticed anything that we haven't been able to resolve, and we haven't got the data granular enough to be able to determine whether those have been the issues. But I think, as I said earlier, training providers and close contact with them has been amazing, really, to ensure that all our learners are able to access endpoint assessments. In some cases, there have been difficulties where the endpoint assessment organisations haven't been fully set up to be able to cope with the pandemic, but I think that's sort of pandemic issues as opposed to background issues for apprentices.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's quite individualized in that respect. I mean, Chris, I've got a question for yourself here. Particularly following on from the race report that came out a week before last, and a lot of the questions around the intersectionality of race and how we look at race from a different perspective. Particularly how each different groups have different characteristics or representation. Do you see that as a challenge when it comes to addressing the diversity and social mobility, and particularly when it comes to putting money into certain communities?
Yes, well, it's also a very complex area, but unless you take an intersectional lens on this, you're just not going to understand what's effective and what's working and what people want and what people's needs are. There's no single frame really that helps you understand that. We are mentioned in the Sewell report in relation to apprenticeships because there's a recommendation for a marketing campaign to get more people from ethnic minority backgrounds doing apprenticeships. I'll be interested in people's views actually as to whether that's a good idea or not. When you're thinking about marketing, yeah, obviously it depends what kind of program you've got, what kind of advertising you've got, what kind of reach you've got into different communities. So again, you're talking about quite a complicated set of programs and initiatives, and it'd be great to get employers on this call and others kind of thinking about how they could use their skills to expand understanding and knowledge of the apprenticeship scheme. So that's we're yet to see what government's response to that report is, but if that one's taken up, then there might be more to come with DFE, DWP, and ourselves on that front. But it's clear from that report and the data that's in it that we need to look at class, race, disability, gender, geography together to understand where the needs are and what people's different opportunities are.
Quite an interesting point you make. A young person from an 18-year-old from Birmingham, for example, where I'm from, will have a different set of challenges to an 18-year-old from Manchester or from London or from different parts of the region, where some of the socioeconomic and societal reasons could impact their decision making apprenticeship. And one of the discussions we had with an employer on this was, well, how do you make changes to this? And for example, it could be transport. You invest in their transportation, you invest in their, so these little pockets of investment can make small but meaningful change in terms of the journey an apprentice makes from not knowing about an apprenticeship to actually taking an apprenticeship. I'm going to take one or two more questions. So Sarah's asking, so Sarah's made a point, says, oh, here's an interesting point. Sarah makes an interesting point around marketing, around income support, because I think a lot of employers, particularly us as an organisation, we've actually signed up to something called Show Your Salary. And it's important that we work with employers that show their salary, because we don't want the ambiguity of, particularly when it comes to social mobility, a person making a decision where salary is a critical factor, to not make that decision, or to not pick an organisation that doesn't have that mentioned. I mean, I think Louise, you've done a lot of work around this, haven't you?
We have, yes, and as an organisation, all of our apprentices are on permanent contracts, not fixed term, and they're all paid the rate for the role. So we don't have any apprentices, for example, on the apprenticeship minimum wage. And with the co-op levy share initiative, which I spoke about earlier, any businesses who want to take advantage of the opportunities that we will support with training and assessment costs of apprentices, they have to be paying the living wage to their apprentices. We aren't able to support businesses who aren't able to do that, and we think that helps to move things forward from a social mobility perspective as well.
That's fantastic to hear. I think this is probably a good point to bring sort of day one or session one to a close. I think the day one of the, first, my apologies, sincere apologies for the slightly technical issues I had at the beginning. As you can imagine, it's not like a physical event where you can actually do it there and then. A lot of it happens, you don't realise it. But I just want to thank Chris, Louise, Sapreena for joining this panel today. Don't forget to continue the conversation by using the hashtag ADSMF and tagging BAME AAUK. Please do connect with our speakers, ask them questions directly, and if you've got any feedback for them in terms of the topic as well, please do share it with them. I want to thank our partners and sponsors, City and Girls Foundation, Mindful Education, and the Social Mobility Commission for their support. Join us tomorrow for the second session. Remember, it's at 11 AM, not 10 AM, and that's day 2 of the forum, where we'll be discussing investing in communities. So this is now the communities themselves. And we're talking to Kirk Dawes, who's got a Queen's Police Medal, a former deputy police officer of the City of Birmingham Rockets Basketball Club, and Paul Harper of New Leaf CIC. There's a question just been asked with regards to the report. I will make sure that this gets out onto the email that follows on Tuesday. So any reports that are mentioned, I'll make sure they are mentioned, or put into an email to all attendees. Until then, thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers, and look forward to speaking to you all tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.